everyone. Welcome back to Behind the Cues, the podcast where we dive into everything theatre, backstage chaos, on-stage magic, and the audience moments we can't stop talking about. I'm Tom, your host, and today's episode is about the weird, wonderful, and slightly unsettling world of theatre superstitions, because theatre people are very superstitious. After digging into the history behind some of the industry's strangest traditions, I found some genuinely fascinating stories, from the infamous Scottish play curse to why whistling backstage can supposedly bring disaster, and the bizarre rituals performers swear by before stepping into the spotlight. So, whether you're a theatre nerd, an actor, a stage crew veteran, or just someone who loves a good backstage mystery, you're in the right place. I must warn you, this one is a little long, so settle in, grab a beverage or a snack. Also, maybe keep a notebook nearby because some of these are wild. You might just learn a thing or two. So, let's pull back the curtain on the strange traditions, taboos, and rituals that have haunted theatres for centuries. Number one, the Scottish play. So, before we get into why actors refuse to say Macbeth inside a theatre, we need to go back to the 16th century Scotland, because this whole superstition starts with a king who was completely obsessed with witchcraft. James VI became fascinated with the supernatural after the execution of his mother, Mary Queen of Scots, and things only escalated in 1589, when he and his new wife were caught in a violent storm at sea while sailing home from Denmark. James blamed witches for nearly sinking the ship and ordered a huge witch hunt back in North Berwick when he returned to Scotland. He even wrote a book on witchcraft called Demonology. A few years later, after becoming King of England, playwrights started creating darker stories to impress him. In 1606, William Shakespeare wrote Macbeth, complete with witches, prophecies, and spell chants that people believed were based on real incantations. According to theatre legend, actual witches were furious Shakespeare had used real spells and cursed the play forever. And the stories surrounding Macbeth are wild. People claim the first production was filled with disaster, including rumours that the actor playing Lady Macbeth died suddenly and Shakespeare had to step in himself. Since then, productions have been linked to accidents, injuries, riots, and near deaths, including the famous Astor Place riot and incidents involving actors like Laurence Olivier and Diana Wynyard, who literally fell off the stage after publicly mocking the curse. There's also a more practical reason the superstition stuck around. Historically, theatres often put on Macbeth when they are struggling financially, because it's guaranteed ticket sales. So, hearing a theatre announce Macbeth sometimes meant money problems behind the scenes. Over time, the stories just became part of the theatre culture. Even actors who don't believe in the curse still avoid saying the name inside a theatre because nobody wants to test it. And if someone accidentally says it, the traditional way to break the curse is to leave the theatre, spin around 3 times, spit over your shoulder, swear loudly, and then knock to be let back in. Theatre people are completely normal about this, obviously. A lot of these stories come from theatre folklore, historical accounts of North Berwick witch trials, and archives from organisations like the Royal Shakespeare Company. Number 2, whistling backstage. So this is another huge theatre taboo, and whistling backstage is one superstition where I actually don't think people are overreacting, because unlike the whole Macbeth curse, this started as a genuine safety issue. Back in the 17th and 18th centuries, theatres didn't have headsets, cue lights, or stage managers screaming intercoms. Most backstage crew members were actually former sailors because they already knew how to handle ropes, pulleys, counterweights, and rigging systems from working on ships. And just like on ships, they communicated using whistles. Different whistle patterns meant different things backstage. One whistle could mean raise the scenery, another could mean lower the backdrop, and another might trigger a fly-in set piece. So imagine being backstage, whistling a tune to yourself, and somebody suddenly drops a part of set from the ceiling, which, considering old theatres are basically giant wooden death traps, that was a pretty serious problem. We are talking massive scenery pieces, heavy sandbags, ropes everywhere, giant curtains swinging around above people's heads. One wrong cue and someone could get seriously injured. I completely understand why theatre people banned whistling backstage. This one feels less like a superstition and more like, please stop before someone gets taken out by a chandelier. But of course, because this is theatre, over time the practical safety rule slowly evolved into a full on superstition. People stopped saying, don't whistle because you might accidentally cue the rigging crew, and instead started saying, don't whistle backstage, it's bad luck. Which sounds way more dramatic, so naturally that version survived. Even now, with modern technology, people still take it seriously. You can be in a completely modern theatre with wireless comms and automated scenery, and the second someone whistles backstage, somebody will go, no whistling. Sometimes they're laughing, sometimes they look genuinely concerned. And I think the reason the tradition still exists is because theatre runs on passed down rituals. Older actors teach younger actors, crews teach new crews, and eventually these little rules become part of theatre culture, whether people fully believe them or not. So, yeah, this is probably the one theatre superstition where I'm actually on the theatre community side. Because if the options are don't whistle backstage or risk being crushed by a flying scenery, I think I'll stay quiet. Number 3, break a leg. So let's talk about the fact that you're absolutely not supposed to say good luck before a performance. Which, if you're not a theatre person, probably sounds completely ridiculous. Because normally, if someone's nervous before doing something important, saying good luck is the polite thing to do. But in theatre, apparently that's basically asking the universe to destroy the entire production. Instead, actors say, break a leg, which somehow sounds both threatening and supportive at the same time. Now, nobody actually knows exactly where this tradition came from, which makes theatre people love it even more. There are a bunch of theories, though. One theory is that actors used to bow or bend the leg after a successful performance. So, break a leg became another way of wishing someone a big round of applause. Another theory says it came from the old phrase breaking the leg line, meaning crossing past the curtain line onto the stage to actually perform. And then there's theatre theory. Actors are just incredibly superstitious people who think saying anything positive will immediately anger fate. Basically, the mindset is if you say good luck, something terrible will happen. Mic failure, missed cue, forgotten lines, set collapse, somebody entering in the wrong costume. And after hearing enough backstage horror stories, I kind of understand why they don't want to tempt theatre gods. It's also part of a wider superstition in theatre where you never say things are going smoothly. You never say, wow, tech rehearsal is going well, because the second you do, somebody's headset explodes and a backdrop catches fire. Theatre people have trust issues with the universe. And the funniest part is that even actors who fully admit they don't believe in superstitions still refuse to say good luck. Because there's always that tiny thought in the back of their mind going, yeah, but what if? So instead, everyone aggressively wishes each other physical harm before going on stage. Break a leg, you too, go smash it, hope you survive Act 2. Theatre encouragement sounds deeply concerning out of context, but somehow it's become one of the biggest traditions in performance culture, and now it's basically impossible to imagine opening night without hearing it backstage at least 50 times. Number 4, peacock feathers are bad. Another really strange theatre superstition is the idea that peacock feathers are bad luck. This one feels exactly like the kind of dramatic rumour theatre people would invent and then refuse to let go of for the next 300 years. So, traditionally, actors avoided having peacock feathers anywhere near the stage. Costumes, props, dressing rooms, all banned in some theatres. And the reason mostly comes down to the pattern on the feathers themselves. People believed the eye shaped on the peacock feathers represented the evil eye. Basically, the idea that someone or something was watching you with bad intentions. In old folklore across different cultures, the evil eye was associated with jealousy, curses, bad fortune, and disaster, which is already creepy enough. But theatre people then took it one step further and decided, yeah, absolutely not. Keep that thing away from opening night. Some stories also linked peacock feathers to death and bad omens because the markings looked unnatural or too perfect, which people in earlier centuries found unsettling. And old theatres already felt eerie enough. Candlelit stages, dark backstage corridors, ropes creaking overhead, random ghost stories everywhere. So it probably didn't take much for people to convince themselves a giant feather covered in staring eyes was cursed. There's also a more practical theory behind the superstition, though. Back in the early days of theatre, costumes decorated with peacock feathers were usually expensive and delicate. If a production could afford elaborate costumes like that, expectations were high. And if the show failed financially, people blamed the feathers. Classic theatrical logic. If production collapsed, obviously it was the bird feathers. And like most theatre traditions, the superstition just kept getting passed down through generations of performers. Even now, some actors won't wear peacock feathers on stage, especially in older theatres or more traditional productions. Others think it's nonsense, but still avoid them anyway, because theatre culture has this weird unspoken rule of don't tempt fate unnecessarily, which sums up almost every theatre superstition ever invented. Number 5. Bad dress, smooth show. A bad dress rehearsal means a great opening night. Theatre people believe this with alarming confidence. Now, if you're not familiar with the theatre, that probably sounds completely backwards. Surely you want the final rehearsal to go smoothly. Nope. Apparently, if the dress rehearsal is too perfect, everyone starts panicking. Because people in theatre are deeply suspicious of happiness. A dress rehearsal is basically the first time the entire show comes together all at once. Costumes, lights, sound, props, quick changes, set changes, and special effects, which means it's usually absolute chaos. And I can speak from experience. Something always goes wrong. Again, a microphone dies, someone misses an entrance, a prop disappears, a costume rips. The lighting operator accidentally sends everyone into darkness for 3 seconds. Completely normal theatre behaviour. But here's where the superstition comes in. If a rehearsal is messy, actors convince themselves, good, we got all the bad luck out early. You'll hear people backstage saying things like, perfect, opening night's going to be amazing now. Which is a chaotic mindset, but weirdly it helps everyone calm down. Over time, this became a full theatre superstition. Bad rehearsal equals good show. And the opposite is apparently terrifying, because if a dress rehearsal goes too smoothly, actors immediately assume disaster is waiting around the corner. Someone will always say, okay, so what's going to go wrong tomorrow then? Theatre people simply do not trust the peaceful rehearsal process. After enough live performances, I kind of understand why. Theatre is unpredictable. No matter how prepared everyone is, something eventually goes wrong. Scenery gets stuck, people forget lines, quick changes become slow changes. It's just a part of live performance. So this superstition probably survived because it became a coping mechanism. Instead of panicking over mistakes, casts turned it into a positive thing. Basically, if the rehearsal falls apart, congratulations everybody, opening night is saved, which feels like the most theatre person logic ever invented. Number 6. Knitting or crocheting is bad. This one is followed religiously, especially in ballet and dance companies, and it's the idea that knitting or crocheting during a performance is bad luck. This one sounds completely harmless at first, like someone's just sitting quietly making a scarf. How dangerous could that be? But in theatre and dance culture, people used to believe that knots carried symbolic power. The idea was that tying knots during a performance, you were somehow tying up the dancer's energy, trapping the movement of the show, or even causing mistakes and injuries on stage. Kind of feels dramatic, but also very on brand for theatre. This superstition became especially common in ballet companies because dancers are already incredibly superstitious people. Ballet is physically demanding, high pressure, and very repetitive. So performers often build routines and rituals around anything that feels lucky or unlucky. When your entire career depends on not falling over in front of hundreds of people, I can understand why dancers start assigning magical powers to random objects. There's also a practical theory behind the superstition, too. Back in older theatres, if someone backstage was knitting during a performance, it could look like they weren't paying attention or respecting the performance. In dance, especially, where timing and concentration are everything, that could be seen as rude or distracting. So, over time, the symbolism mixed with backstage etiquette turned into a full on superstition. No knitting during the show. Some people even believed that knots could literally cause dancers to trip, get tangled, or injure themselves on stage. Again, incredibly dramatic. But this is theatre, so naturally everyone leaned into it. And weirdly, versions of this superstition exist outside of theatre too. In some cultures, sailors believed that knot tying could control the wind, while in folklore, knots were often linked to magic, curses, or binding spells. So, when you combine old folklore, stressed performers, and centuries of theatre traditions, you end up with dancers side eyeing anyone holding a knitting needle near a stage. And even performers who don't believe in the superstition still avoid it because theatre culture has this unspoken rule of if it's been considered bad luck for 200 years, maybe just don't test it. Number 7, the curses of forbidden musicals. We need to talk about so called forbidden musicals because, yes, some shows have developed reputations so chaotic that people genuinely believe they are cursed. And after researching some of these productions, I get it. I really do. Probably the most infamous example is Spider-Man: Turn Off the Dark. This show basically became legendary for backstage disasters. The production involved flying stunts, aerial fights, massive moving sets, complicated rig systems. Basically, somebody looked at Broadway and thought, what if we turned this into a superhero themed health and safety nightmare? During the previews and performances, there were multiple technical failures, and several actors were injured during the flying sequence and stunt accidents. At one point, the show became so infamous, people generally started referring to it as cursed, which feels fair when your lead actor is swinging above the audience, attached to wires 8 shows a week. And the thing is, theatre people love turning difficult productions into legends. If a show has enough accidents, technical disasters, injuries, or chaos attached to it, eventually it stops being a difficult production and becomes the cursed show. Another musical that gets talked about a lot is Phantom of the Opera. Not because it's forbidden exactly, but because it's notoriously difficult to stage properly. You've got giant chandeliers falling from ceilings, trap doors, underground boat scenes, fire effects, huge moving set pieces. Basically, one small technical mistake, and suddenly the audience is no longer immersed in Gothic romance. We're watching expensive chaos unfold in real time. And because the musical itself is about a haunted theatre, productions naturally picked up ghost stories and backstage superstition over the years, which feels inevitable. Then there's Cats, which I've personally never seen. I probably never will watch it. I just think theatre people enjoy watching non theatre people try to understand it because every explanation sounds insane. You're basically saying, okay, so everyone's cats and they sing for 2 hours, and then one of them gets spiritually chosen to ascend into the sky. And somehow this became one of the biggest musicals ever made. Theatre is unwelled sometimes. There are also shows that smaller theatre group fear because they're just so difficult to pull off. Things like Sweeney Todd, Into the Woods, or Les Mis, they're vocally exhausting, technically demanding, emotionally intense, and usually require absolute chaos backstage to function properly. And if one production goes badly, that's it. The legends begin. Because theatre people don't just remember disaster, they preserve them like ancient folklore. Every theatre has stories like, remember the production where the set collapsed? Or remember when somebody got stuck under the stage during Act 2? And over time, those stories grow into full theatre mythology. Number 8, don't say the Q word. Huge theatre superstition is something stage crews especially take very seriously. Never say the Q word. And by Q word, I mean quiet. Because the second somebody backstage says, wow, it's really quiet tonight, the entire production immediately falls apart. And this is one superstition I fully believe because somehow it always happens. Usually it starts with somebody in the stage crew casually trying to be positive. It's actually pretty calm tonight. And then within 5 minutes, somebody loses a prop, an actor misses an entrance, the lighting desk crashes, a costume zip explodes. Suddenly, backstage looks like a live emergency response exercise. And everybody instantly blames the person who said it. You'll literally see people turn around and say things like, why would you say that out loud? It's basically theatre law at this point. I think superstition survives because backstage is normally controlled chaos anyway. There is always something happening. Cue calls, quick changes, scenery move in, actors panicking, somebody running down a corridor holding a shoe for reasons nobody understands. So when things feel too calm, theatre people immediately assume something bad is waiting around the corner. And if someone points out how smooth things are going, apparently that summons the chaos faster. And honestly, after enough productions, like I said, I kind of understand why people refuse to say it. Because somehow every single time someone says, nothing can go wrong now, something will. Number 9, stage managers are sacred. Now, this next one is not really a superstition, it's more just an unspoken theatre rule. Never underestimate the stage manager. And I say this from experience, not to toot my own horn or anything, but stage managers genuinely hold productions together through pure organization, caffeine, and stress management. Because from the audience, theatre looks magical and effortless. Backstage, absolute controlled chaos. Actors forgetting props. Again, costumes ripping. Set pieces moving everywhere. Sound cues, lighting cues. People asking 17 questions at once. Somebody definitely panicking in a corridor. And somehow the stage manager is expected to keep all of it running on time while also remaining calm enough to call the show. I think the reason stage managers became in theatre culture is because Everybody eventually realizes the production would completely collapse without them. They're basically the human glue holding the entire thing together, and theatre people know this, or some of them do, at least. That's why stage managers have the most mythical backstage status, where everyone jokes, don't anger the stage management, because if the stage manager loses control, suddenly nobody knows where they're supposed to be, when they're entering, where the props have gone, whether Act 2 is even starting on time. Civilization ends surprisingly quickly backstage. And the funniest part is, stage managers are usually the calmest people in the room externally, while internally they're probably running through about 400 disasters at once. I think working backstage gives you a whole new respect for them because audience only ever see the polished final product. They don't see the person backstage quietly fixing the problems before anyone else notices they happened. So while theatre superstitions are usually about ghosts, curses, and bad luck, the stage manager thing feels less like a superstition and more like common sense. Respect your stage manager. They know everything. They see everything, and at some point they've probably saved the production without anybody realizing. Number 10. Walking the stage before the half. This one's less of a superstition and more of a personal ritual. Although I'm curious if other performers do this too, but before I perform, I always like to walk the space. Usually I walk around the theatre, the auditorium, backstage corridors, just kind of taking everything in before the audience comes in. Obviously, that's only if a venue allows it, because some theatres don't allow you to use the stage until your allocated warm up time. But whenever I can, I like to do it. And I think a lot of performers have little rituals like this without even realizing that they're doing it. For me, it's less about superstition and more about settling my nerves and getting completely comfortable in the space before everything gets chaotic. Because every theatre feels slightly different. Some stages feel huge, some feel really intimate, some backstage areas are calm, others feel like you're trapped in a maze underneath the building. And I think the walk in the space beforehand helps make it feel familiar before suddenly stepping into a full performance mode. There's also something kind of surreal about seeing a theatre before it's full. The empty auditorium, the stage lights warming up, the quiet backstage corridor before everyone starts panicking and running around looking for missing props. It's probably one of the calmest moments of the entire day. I think performers are naturally quite ritualistic people anyway. Some people do vocal warm ups, some people listen to music, some people need complete silence. I apparently just want to wander around a building like a Victorian ghost inspecting the venue before curtain up. But weirdly, it does actually help. I think sometimes you need a moment to mentally switch from normal human being to, okay, cool, time to perform in front of people now. And that is where we're going to leave today's episode of Behind the Cues. Once I started researching theatre superstitions, curses, and backstage traditions, I fell completely down a rabbit hole, hence why the lengthy episode. There's just so much weird history and chaotic backstage lore connected to theatre, and I found all of it fascinating because when you really think about it, performers willingly spend their time avoiding certain words, refusing to whistle, panicking over peacock feathers, and convincing themselves that a terrible rehearsal is somehow a fantastic sign. And all of these traditions have survived for hundreds of years. I think that's part of why theatre is so special. Every production, every cast, every venue has its own little rituals, stories, and backstage legend that gets passed down from one generation of performers to the next. Some come from real history, some come from safety precautions, and some come from folklore. Some are just probably stressed actors trying to feel slightly more in control before opening night, which honestly, very relatable. If you've got any theatre rituals, superstition, backstage rules, or completely chaotic production stories of your own, I would genuinely love to hear them. You can find me at Tom Does Theatre on TikTok and Instagram, so definitely come and share your stories because I know there are loads of weird traditions that I've probably never even heard of. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Behind the Cues. I've been Tom, and until next time, don't say Macbeth backstage, don't whistle in the wings, and definitely don't say it's quiet. Bye-bye.